Hey there, Chuck Quinley again, back with you on the Grounded podcast, season 2, Read Jesus Everything, and taking a break from the studio time, and I want to do some question and response sessions. I think I'm going to do one in between every studio one so that we can try to approach this huge emotional subject of the faith crisis that's going on all over the world, and we can approach it as a conversation because I really hope that we can just have a reasonable, respectful conversation. We don't have to agree. And again, the things that I'm sharing, I am not saying this is doctrine. I am saying this is my opinion. I have a voice, you have a voice, and I have thought so much about this, prayed about it. It never leaves me. And I'm just to the point now that I really want to share this on an open space because there are just so many people that are struggling these days. They're struggling with their faith. And part of that struggle is the battle between institutionalized Christianity in its many different forms and the Jesus of the Bible. And they look at those two things and they say, these don't match. And then that's where the struggles begin. Well, at least that's one struggle. Another struggle generally is science and the attack of science on the Bible, and that's a big subject. Really happy to talk about that too. But the reason I'm bringing this up is I'm a grandpa at this point, and I have had my own journey in life, and these things are important to me. You have to be grounded. You have to have a foundation of belief that you believe. You really have to believe it, that it is truth. And I think that's what's happening with the explosion of anxiety today because just the thing called belief is on shaky ground. It doesn't even matter if it's about things related to God or big thoughts like that. Just belief. Do you believe the government? Do you believe the news? Do you believe the history book? Do you believe science? Because it's sponsored by corporations. You know, is there anything you can believe and know that it's absolutely true? Because even when you say trust the science, time out, who paid for the science? Because that's going to skew it. That's already been proven too. The science has proven that the results are skewed by whoever paid for the research. So anyway, who do we believe? Who can we believe anymore? So when you don't know what you believe is true, wow, how do you approach the world? So that's why this is such an important thing for me. All right. So without further ado, let me jump into the first question. Number one, how do you handle seasons of doubt without losing your faith? How do you handle seasons of doubt without losing your faith? Um, the only answers I'm going to give for any of these are just my personal thoughts on it. Everything depends on what you have. Faith just means trust. It just means confidence. And I almost don't like the word because then it gets applied to religious settings. And I think it's bigger than religious settings. Trust and confidence. So how do you hold on to confidence in a time of doubt? I think it depends on what it is you believe. If your entire belief is based on doctrines needing to work together properly and logically for you to believe, that's one kind of belief. If your belief is completely grounded in the Bible, everything about the Bible, so then you develop a theory of the Bible and it has to mean this. And then, so now your confidence is in the Bible. I don't have either one of those. I have confidence in the Bible, honestly, and I love theology. I have a deep theology in my own mind. I have my mind pretty much made up about most things in theology. Some things, when you get way out into eschatology, um, Scripture's not so clear. So you can say we agree to disagree, but my belief is in Jesus. That's why I would just keep beating on this drum. My belief is in my personal experience with Jesus, not my doctrine of Jesus, not the songs about Jesus, not what the Bible says about Jesus, my personal experience, because I've been down this road before. I have had times in my mind where I had to question, and I think it is important to let yourself question. just don't let yourself hmm, be overly influenced by one thing. For example, I had a year where I read it was the year of the new atheism when Dawkins was a big deal, and they're writing, all these God delusion and big public debates. And I said, well, I'm a grown up and I think I need to read these books. Well, I read those books and I thought about all their arguments. And pretty much it all came down to I agree with half of them. It was that over history, whether you're talking about Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, doesn't matter. Religions get corrupt and because humans are corrupt, and they are inconsistent because humans are inconsistent, and they are a problem in the world. It's like, okay, I'll vote for that one. That still doesn't mean there's no God. Um, but to allow my mind to say, think for yourself because you need this. But if all I did was read those books, if all I do is follow podcasts that are pushing me with one kind of slant, you are building in your own mind a problem. You've got to balance the two sides. My big faith crisis happened when I was in seminary, and it happens more often than you would think because you have kind of a naive view of things when you come like just out of Sunday school into seminary, and then they start sort of pulling back the band-aid on a lot of stuff. And then it can throw you because you understand that the reality is a lot more nuanced than you think about a lot of things that you already believe. And so you have to go down and find you another ground of truth, and hopefully you'll hit one. But um every book I read for 2 years, every single book was, the Bible's not written by who you think. It was written much later than you think. The whole JEDP theory of the Old Testament basically is that none of it is trustworthy, and that everything you read is on behalf of some group in Jewish culture, whether it was, the priesthood, you know, the people connected with whatever aspects of society, the prophets, and they are writing these stories to boost themselves up and give themselves more power in the society. So that's all I read for 2 years. And man, I started really shaking around. And then I came across, thank God, Gleason Archer. And Gleason Archer is a Bible scholar. And he says, hey, here's an argument against this in the Bible. Now, let's look at the other side. What they're not telling you is actually read the footnotes, go see their sources. And man, he had an answer for everything. And I was so grateful for that. So thank God for thinkers and for people that will push us to do our own thinking. Like, don't you read the headlines, read the book, and then read the footnotes, and then go see if what they quote, as their proof is really even what's in that footnote. And way too often, I've done scholarly work for many, many years. Way too often, it is not. They're just like bluffing in poker and hoping you don't call their hand. So this is a day where more than ever, you need to think. You really need to think. But back to my long story, you know, I came to a point, and it has come back once or twice in my life where I had to say, are we just making all this up? You know, is this just what people do to make themselves feel better? Is there even a God? Is all of what I believe, is it even true? And it always comes down to, well, you could say that I was manipulated by church services to have certain experiences, and you can say all those things, but I've got a personal experience with Jesus. I've had it since I was 18 years old. He has told me things. Now, I'm not one of those people that God talks to for 45 minutes every morning while I'm having my coffee. And some people, they say that's how it goes for them. Doesn't go that way for me. Word of God is always radiating. There's always truth. Nature is always speaking. God is speaking through conversations. He's speaking through a million different ways, but every now and then he says something to me. It's something directive. In my life, it's always very, very short, like a sentence, a bumper sticker. But honestly, mostly it's good enough for 5 more years of living. It's that clear. But I have some very dramatic stories where that God, for example, one of our last baby, Sherry was concerned about how this pregnancy was going. Julia was late, and one day, right at the end of the workday, and Manila traffic was awful, like hours to get 15 miles. And Sherry says, "I've got to go to the doctor." And I said, "Let's go." So we jumped in the car, and she called and said, "Do not go home. Do not go home." And we drove there, and the doctor checked, Sherry out, and she says, yeah, it's a little late, a little. I think everything's okay. We'll do some tests because it was a weekend. We'll do some tests on Monday. So let's reschedule and let's get you in for some good ultrasound and we'll take a good look at this on Monday. And I I don't want to say I heard a voice. It's more like I left my keys on the table and we've been looking for 3 days and I just remembered I left my keys on the table. I mean, it's that clear. And it was no, we're going to have a C-section by 7 a.m. tomorrow. And the doctor said, "What?" And Sherry said, "What?" And they sat there for a minute and the doctor changed the subject. And then she started trying to call to get the schedule for Monday, and I said, "No, tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. It has to be." Anyway, long story short, Sherry says, "Go for it." She had never had a C-section, and that morning when they opened her up, the baby was triple cord wrapped, a full pound, overweight, and as soon as they saw the child, whoever was in the room, Sherry heard them say, because they didn't let me in, um, "Wow, somebody had discernment on this." And they said, "This child would have had serious difficulties in labor." So I have those, I have a dozen of those. And if you will walk with God all your life, you're going to have a dozen of those. So you can discredit anything you want because my faith is not in my doctrine. I thank God for my doctrine. My faith is not even in my Bible. I thank God for the Bible, but my Bible is not God. God is God. The Bible is his tool to help change our mind and help us think right and give us revelation and guide our thoughts. Um, God is God, and Jesus is the door to God, and he has opened a new and living way. You don't have to be settled with just belief in doctrine. You can know the Lord. It's your birthright. And honestly, I think to know the Lord is salvation. So I thank God for churches everywhere, and I thank God for communion services, and I thank God for the pageantry of it all, and choirs, and how many thousands of times I burst into tears in a worship service, and I love all of that, and hold hands with people and pray for them, have people pray for me, learn from great people who really, labor in the Lord, and then learn from those people who are not great Bible scholars, but man, they live it. And all of that, that is also rich. But it's all just means of grace from God. But the deal is between me and God. That's the relationship. It is walking with him. And I really hope you won't settle for anything less than that. And that kind of faith is really hard to shake because it's grounded in your reality, not in a book, even a holy book, not in a doctrine that's been followed for 1,000 years by your group. It's just your knowledge, it's your personal lifetime awareness that I have walked with God in life. And I think that is the privilege for every human being. That's what Jesus came to give you. So I don't know how to help people who are just struggling in their doctrine, except to say, you need to know the Lord. And I promise you, if you will seek him, you will find him. If you will be quiet and put everything else aside and get off your phone and quit watching TV and stop filling your mind and cluttering and just get in places like this, that's what Jesus did. He left civilization. He went to wilderness areas and he had time with God. You can find God there and he will settle your doubts in places like that. Well, that was a long answer, and that's probably the only one I'm going to get to on this episode, but I've got more loaded up here. So I'm gonna close off this episode and come back next time with more questions. I hope you enjoy it and I hope this is helpful to you. And I really want to hear from you also. So please, in whatever platform you are watching this on, send us your comments and your questions and give us your thoughts. We're all on this journey together. Let's read Jesus everything. See you next time.